Character and freedom. What in the world does character have to do with freedom? Isn't freedom just a right? Isn't freedom an inalienable right? Uh, it is a right that we need, but character affects the freedoms that we are able to enjoy. Hallmark University is located in the USA, the United States of America, and if there was a country known for freedom, it is America. It is the USA. It's a hallmark. It's a identity. It's what we are known for. It's what we believe strongly. We fight for it. We fight for freedom. We believe in freedom. We want freedom. But character is very important to freedom. One of our founders, Benjamin Franklin, said, "Only a virtuous people are capable of freedom." Not just only a virtuous people deserve freedom. I think everybody deserves freedom, but not everybody's capable of freedom. And Ben Franklin said only virtuous people are capable of freedom. If you think back to what the founders were dealing with, we're switching over from a lot of rules to a king, to the dictatorship, really, over to self-government. And what are the implications of switching over to self-government? Well, now we're expecting people to really have the law on the inside, for them to operate more as they see fit. And so the founders were saying only a virtuous people are capable of freedom. Patrick Henry said, "No free government or the blessings of liberty can be preserved to any people but by a firm adherence to justice, moderation, temperance, frugality, and virtue." So in other words, this blessing of liberty, it's great, everybody should have it, but the only people who really should be, who can be trusted with freedom and liberty, are those who adhere to justice and being moderate and temperance, frugality, and virtue. But the second point to add here is that Patrick Henry noted, not just, you're not born with these things. You have to develop these things, and not only just learn it once, not just learn it and study it, but to develop it. And we have to have a frequent recurrence. We have to keep coming back to it. We have to keep talking about justice and developing those things, growing those things. And perhaps maybe that implies that it's depletable, our courage to stand up for what's right. Maybe it's different from day to day. John Adams said, "The only foundation of a free constitution is pure virtue." Now, interesting. The Constitution, is that a document? Can a document have virtue? This Constitution is known as the government by the people, for the people, and of the people. So in other words, this government really is the people. And unless those people, which make up this government, are virtuous, then the foundation of this country is very shaky. It has no foundation. This freedom that we have is built on the virtue and the character of the people in our society. Martin Luther King, not a contemporary of the founders in the 1700s, but in the 1960s, but nonetheless just as much of a pillar to build the freedoms and the equality and justice of this nation on. He said, "Intelligence plus character, that is the goal of education." So not just getting smart, that's not going to create freedom. It's developing a person's character that's going to create freedom for them as well. And education, that's why we believe so strongly here at Hallmark University. As educators, not only are we supposed to instill knowledge and develop skills, but it's even more important for us to focus on developing character in each of our students and in ourselves. So it's time to pause and reflect a little bit. Why did the founders believe character was critical to a free society? Think back to what they were thinking about, what was important to them. They were shifting from a government that was king, it was a monarchy, it was overbearing. they were making rules without thinking about the people. It was you were subjects of the king. You didn't have freedoms. They were switching over from this external dictatorship, almost the monarchy, over to freedom, to self-government. Why did they believe that character was critical to a free society? Okay, to gain a little insight into why the founders might have thought that virtue and character was so important, I'd like to look at the theoretical framework, or this model, that Kohlberg developed. He called it the stages of moral development, or the levels of moral development. And there are these three stages I would like to unpack here: pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. But the big picture is to recognize that moral development is a progression from external motivation towards internal motivation, things like self-control, self-government, or what is labeled as post-conventional here. First, the pre-conventional level, and this stage is really characterized by external influences or control of ethical behavior. So first, stage one, a individual makes ethical decisions, or what is right or wrong, not because it's right or wrong, but because I want to avoid punishment. So I'm going to make a choice, like a behavioral choice, whether or not it's going to hurt me or not. The second stage is more about self-interest. So the interest shifts to rewards rather than just punishment. So what's in it for me? What's good for me? The effort is made to secure the greatest benefit for myself. I focus on the direct advantages to me, and the fairness of a simple exchange has to do with only if you do something good for me will I do something good for you. So that's the pre-conventional, what's labeled pre-conventional level of moral development. Now moving on to the second level with stages 3 and 4, Kohlberg calls the conventional level of moral development. This is where not just what benefits me, but how do I fit in? How do I conform to the societal group norms? So that stage 3 is really defined. It's the conformity and interpersonal accord is how it might be labeled. It's the good boy or good girl level. I'm making an effort to secure approval and maintain a friendly relation with others. Not necessarily what's right or wrong, but don't rock the boat, just fit in. Considerations focus on the good or evil intentions of the parties, on the party's concern for maintaining friendships and good relationships and maintaining approval. And then the stage 4 there is called authority and social order. So now I'm, rather than just maintaining conformity, my orientation now moves towards fixed rules. Just follow the rules. The purpose of morality is maintaining the social order. Interpersonal accord or agreement is expanded to include the entire society. So what's good for the greater good? Considerations focus on maintaining the legal system, maintaining existing roles and formal organizational structure. Okay, and research tends to indicate that most adults stay at this level. But the next level in this model, is called post-conventional. Now remember, pre-conventional, the rules or the forces are really on the outside in, avoiding punishment, avoiding or going for reward on the outside. That's what determines right or wrong. And that second level was maintaining norms, don't rock the boat. But this third level, where stages 5 and 6 are, really switch over to internal forces. My internal values and principles, such as justice, equality, compassion, humanization, the value of humans determine my ethical choices. And the two stages here, stage 5, is a social contract, mutual benefit, win-win, reciprocity. Morally right and legally right may not always be the same once I've got this internal values here. Utilitarian or pragmatic rules that make life better for everyone start to drive my decisions, my ethical decisions. In the stage 6, where very few people achieve, now this individual has universal principles on the inside. Morality is based on principles that transcend mutual benefit. It's more, is this the right thing to do? Not, does the government agree? Do the laws agree? Am I going to get in trouble with the police? It's now more, what is right? What is just? What is driven by compassion? And I'm making ethical decisions from the inside out. All right, so think about Nazi Germany, where the rules had shifted to oppress certain people. Most of the country went along with those rules in a conventional morality state. Very few people had the courage to stand up for what was right in the face of the punishment that would come from it, or the imprisonment. And so that's where you can see those higher stages are very few people ever do operate or live in those stages. So what are the implications of Kohlberg's stages of moral development? Well, first, believing in values is different from acting on values. A lot of people believe in justice and what is right, but acting on those things are very different. I may believe and assume that one thing is right, but actually having the courage to stand up and act on those beliefs when there is a cost is very different. An ethical framework is necessary to connect my values to action. Now, what we mean by that is developing a framework, a checklist, a process. I see something, I see a situation, and I go through a checklist on how to respond to that. So somebody in the first stage, my checklist would be, is that going to benefit me? Or am I going to get hurt by my actions here? Right? Or a second level would be, am I going to rock the boat? What is everybody else doing? That's the framework. Or somebody in the third level, in that post-conventional level, their checklist might be, is this just? Is this compassionate? Is this going to serve equality? And I'm going through this checklist, this theoretical, an ethical framework, or a checklist, or a process that I have been intentional about developing. So I have that framework to connect my values to action. Another implication is that there's often a price to pay for moral decisions. Maybe that's why more people do not achieve stage 5 and 6. Because it's not just a matter of learning, it's a matter of paying a price when you stand up with courage for something that is right, or something that you believe is right. And courage and willpower, they're depletable as well. And what we mean by that is that you wake up in the morning and you've just been thinking, or maybe you just watched a movie about Martin Luther King and you want to stand up for what's right. That's a great time. Your courage is high to go stand up for something. But let's say it's been a stressful situation, or maybe you're in a tough financial situation and you're very vulnerable. Well, now you have less courage to stand up for what is right. And we need to be aware that our courage, our willpower, they're depletable, and to learn how to fill those things up, that we need continuous development. And another thing to understand is that these stages, even though they have nice, clean definitions, they're not clear-cut. Individuals are not in only one stage or one level of ethical development. It's possible to move back and forth. You've just watched an inspiring movie or read an inspiring book. You may be operating in stage 5 or stage 6, and maybe just for a certain area. So you may believe in, have just read something about racism, and so you're making a strong ethical decision and stance on racism. But maybe you don't know much about gender equality and have not read on that. So you may be at a stage 5 or 6 when it comes to racism, but at a stage 2 or 3 or 4 when it comes to gender equality. So there is variability on the stages that we may be at on a given topic, at a given time, in a given situation. And we can go back and forth. And so becoming aware of where we are in these stages and different issues can help us move forward and grow in making good ethical decisions. So there you have a brief introduction to Kohlberg's stages of moral development. Now remember, the big takeaway here is that at this pre-conventional stage, that we are making ethical decisions based on what's on the outside. We're externally motivated by punishment or reward. And conventional stage, we are maintaining norms with the group. Don't rock the boat. Stick with the law. Just obey orders. As long as the law says it's okay, it must be okay. But this post-conventional stage is where we have values, virtue, character on the inside, and that is what drives our actions from the inside out. We stand up for justice in the face of anything. So then, if a society lived in this post-conventional stage where there's a lot of virtue, a lot of character in its people, does it need a lot of rules, a lot of laws? Or can it live in freedom, self-government, self-regulation? What might it look like if a society was trending from post-conventional towards pre-conventional, from a lot of character to less character? Would you expect for there to be fewer laws or there to be more laws? So let's look at the amount of laws that the United States has over the last approximately 80 years or so. Look at the total pages published in the Federal Register. That's a record of the new rules and regulations for that year. You're looking down here back in 1936, about 3,000 pages in that year. And we hit a high over here of well over 90,000 pages, which is over 30 times the increase in the number of regulations coming out each year. So is this data consistent with increasing character or decreasing character? Looking at the total pages published in the Code of Federal Regulations, that's the CFR. Starting in 1950, you're looking at something less than 10,000 pages there in the CFR, and it has grown over the last 68 years all the way up to 180,000 pages. That's an 18 times increase. Let's look at the budget for regulatory agencies by fiscal year. These are things like TSA, Social Security, or just any of the regulatory agencies, the FAA, Department of Education. Back here in 1960, you're looking at about $3 billion. Over here in 2018, we've now, and these are constant dollars, by the way, you're looking now at $60 billion. It's an increase of 20 times over that brief period. These are constant dollars, not inflation. The $3 billion spent on regulatory agencies back in 1960, now $60 billion in 2018. And looking at the number of people working at our regulatory agencies, those have also increased here from around 50,000 here in 1960, all the way up over to nearly 300,000. Again, huge increase in staffing. So is this data consistent with a society that is increasing in character or decreasing in character? Look at this data together, and is this more consistent with a society that is increasing in its character or virtues, or is it more consistent with a society that is decreasing in its character or virtue or morality? Have we ever seen this shift in the number of laws or change in the number of laws elsewhere in history? Well, if we look at a very ancient, a very old model or account, we look all the way back in Genesis to the biblical account. Garden of Eden had basically one rule: don't eat of this tree. Very simple. And then as you go through the biblical account in Exodus 20, Moses then gave 10 commandments. And over the course of centuries following, through the prophets and the judges and the kings, that there were hundreds of laws added to this society. However, 2,000 years ago, it's recorded that Jesus then basically reduced all of that into one rule. In Matthew 22, Jesus, when asked about what are the most important rules, his response was, well, if you love God and if you love your neighbor as yourself, so basically put love on the inside, you will fulfill all these other laws. Rather than having hundreds of laws on the outside trying to control you, if you develop love on the inside, that's the only rule that you need. And that is also shown elsewhere in the New Testament, Romans 13:8, Romans 13:10, and Galatians 5:14. Now finally, I want to leave you with a question. What is legislation's relationship with character, or government's relationship with character? Can you legislate character? In other words, legislation, these are the regulations that live on the outside around us. Can you use what's on the outside to force character or to develop that character? Or is legislation more to support and to reinforce, to put curbs and guides, safety nets for character? So if you think back to what Martin Luther King Jr. said, he said the goal of education is intelligence and character. So it's very difficult to legislate character, to try to create rules that develop character. So you can't create a bunch of rules, develop character in somebody, and then take those rules away. Once you have those rules out there, they kind of have to stay there. Rather, education's approach should be to develop the character on the inside. And the more that we are successful in developing our character and being self-governed, being self-controlled and regulated, standing up for justice, being compassionate, standing for equality, having integrity and speaking the truth from the inside out, the less that we need the legislation on the outside. So really, it's the character on the inside that determines the legislation, not legislation determining our character. So think about that and reflect on that.